Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Tom McKevitt. Tom McKevitt represents the 17th Assembly District, an Assembly District that includes Nassau County. We thank you folks on Long Island for joining us. And Tom McKevitt, nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Mike.
But now, we're taping this program right at the end of the month of August. There's not much happening here in Albany at this time of year, right? The legislature is not in session right now.
Thank goodness.
What
Thank goodness for the people of the state of New York we're not in session.
Less trouble caused
Yes.
that way, is that the idea?
We haven't done anything bad the last month, so yes.
So what does an assemblyman do with his time? You got things back in the district you're taking care of?
People say to me, well, you're on vacation now at this point. And even when, we have our weeks off in February or April, I tell people, I'm not in Albany. It doesn't mean I'm on vacation by any stretch of the imagination. Just yesterday, we actually did a blood drive at the Farmingdale Public Library, and we got about 63 pints of blood that we collected.
Excellent.
We did one actually in East Meadow about a couple weeks before then, and we collected 107 pints of blood. So, there's all sorts of activities I'm doing in the community, obviously seeing my constituents. And actually, I guess part of what we do, too, is find out the consequences of what happened during session. Because we're up here in the enclave of Albany quite a while, and then you go back and hear the people and really hearing what their concerns are at this point.
You hear that a lot at the national level of people being in the Washington bubble.
Yes.
It's not dissimilar when you're here in Albany, because there's all this talk and debate and philosophical this and that about what can happen legislatively.
Right.
But then you get home,
yes,
and the rubber's kind of hitting the road, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Listen, for my local governments, this governor, when he came into office in 2011 and talked about doing the tax cap, was always talking about mandate relief. As far as bringing, relief to local governments, whether it's more as far as Medicaid's concerned or other types of tax relief, and that still has not happened after 6 years. And apparently he doesn't even pay attention to it. It's not even a conversation on the table anymore. And it's very equally frustrating, again, when I see my people in the towns and the counties and the villages around town as well, too, with, again, a lot of constraints they have trying to go and pay for the basic expenses. Certainly one thing you hear quite a bit is roadway improvement. And, we had a situation a couple of years ago where the state had about $4 to $5 billion of, windfall money that came from financial settlements. And, I had a plan that we should funnel that through the CHIPS funding. So we can actually live with municipalities all throughout the state of New York and put people to work with great roadwork infrastructure. But almost all that money went to one infrastructure in the state of New York, which I had the opportunity to travel on for the first time in my life this morning in order to come in here.
I think I know what you're talking about.
I got to travel on the Mario Cuomo Bridge.
See, I would have called it the Tappan Zee Bridge.
No, Mike. Remember, the most important thing we did as we ended session is we renamed the bridge the Mario Cuomo Bridge. Let us not forget, that's what we had to come back for Albany for in the last week of June, was for that.
How was the ride over the bridge?
Bridge was very smooth, actually. I have to say, it got here in one shape. Actually, only half the bridge is functioning right now. So when you go from Westchester to Rockland, that is still actually perfectly fine. The new bridge, the old bridge, are still going to use till the end of the year, so they're able to go and finalize that and do the roadway improvements and make that connection occur.
It was that ride from your home district to the bridge that maybe could have used some improvement.
You certainly could have, and here's what it comes down to too. As we come back in the last week in June, we had to come back for a special session to do really two very important things. Number one, to renew all the sales taxes for all the counties in the state of New York, because that had not gotten accomplished, and it should have been accomplished, usually as a matter of form for years. And for various reasons, that got held up. It got tied in with mayoral control in New York City schools. And of course, that makes a lot of sense. Mayoral control in New York City schools with the sales tax. But it all got tied together, one thing and one point or another. Yeah. And one thing that this governor insisted more than anything else was we had to rename the bridge the Mario Cuomo Bridge. And just go back with people, everyone's been calling it the Tappan Zee Bridge since the day it was built in the 1950s. But believe it or not, in 1994, the bridge was already renamed. And there were signs there, which I saw up until, a couple months ago, which said it was the Malcolm Wilson Tappan Zee Bridge.
Former governor.
Former Assembly Coach Chairman for many years, Assemblyman for 20 years from the Yonkers area over in Westchester, was Lieutenant Governor for 11 years, and then became governor. Finally, for his 1 year at that point, or actually almost close to 15 years, he was lieutenant governor, and then was governor at one point. And his family was saying how proud they were, how in 1994, Mario Cuomo signed the bill to make that the Malcolm Wilson Bridge. And his family obviously was quite upset by this thing. I mean, literally, they've now started the precedent, Mike, where even though you've named something after someone, you can just rip it off and put it on for someone else because the current governor wants that. And that's essentially what happened here in this instance. But let's talk more importantly about the bridge. So we take this billions of dollars and we pay for it the bridge. And what the governor says that through 2020, the tolls on the bridge will be frozen. What happens after 2020? They had a forum in Manhattan last month where actually the chairman of the Republican Party asked him, how is the bridge going to be paid for? And his answer was, well, the entire thruway system is going to have to pay for the bridge. Then the next day, the governor's staff comes out and says, oh, no, that's not going to happen at all. Just the people in the bridge are going to pay for the bridge. Well, if the tolls are frozen to 2020, what happens in 2021? And no one's answering that question. And I've seen estimates where that $5 toll today is going to have to go in excess of $20 to pay for it.
Not unprecedented in New York, right?
No, but to go from 5 to 20, just literally overnight. And here again, the governor is telling people, well, through 2020, we're going to keep it frozen. And I'm wondering, is that really done for financial reasons? Or does he want to be somewhere else in 2020? And then we're going to have to go and clean up this mess at the end of the day. You know, so that's frustrating that you see policies being driven here, and is it really being done to provide the most efficient bridge for the best financing program, or was done just to kick the can down the road, which is what we've been doing in the state for years, and then one day the bomb drops on us.
Forgive me for my ignorance here, but being an upstater, I'm not quite as in tune with what you and the people you represent go through on a daily basis, but I keep hearing about this summer of hell.
Yes.
And the MTA and all the troubles with the mass transit down in the metro area. Is that impacting the people you represent in any capacity?
Believe it or not, the summer of hell wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be.
Really?
It really, it was amazing. And what made it so bad is that back in February and March and April, there were delays routinely a couple times a week about people taking an extra 2 or 3 hours to get home from Manhattan during the entire year. That wasn't the case this summer at all. I mean, certainly what they did was they reduced the number of trains. They made trains longer at that point. They had a ferry service going from Glen Cove over there at that point. They actually had buses from the Nassau Coliseum going there, and believe it or not, very few people took those buses. They kept there. But I'll say what the MTA did was they were expecting a bad situation. They planned for it, and I think it was implemented better. Again, the results were better than I had thought, only because February through June was so bad. It was the worst that anyone ever saw it, that we expected that to include during the summer, and frankly, the summer wasn't that bad. So now actually we're fearing is, the summer of hell officially ends on Friday. On Friday, September 1st, the Amtrak work on those tunnels ends, and we go back to the regular time. Now that's what I'm fearing. Because, of course, too, people are on vacation. I think people accommodate for it.
Right.
But once we get back to September, when you were talking, again, from at least from January and February on through June, it was the worst disaster of the Long Island Railroad I ever saw. And I'm fearing that we go back to normal again. But the summer was not as bad as, again, we anticipated being so bad because of what it was. And frankly, we're almost through it, and it wasn't as bad as we feared.
It'll be interesting to see then, because September brings with it post-Labor Day. Kids are back to school. Everybody's rhythms are back to, many of them out of the summer mode and back into routine.
And the question is, the MTA was prepared to prepare because you had tunnels which weren't used, not tracks being used. Now let's go back to the full system, and let's say you have a signal problem one day. How are they able to handle that? Can they handle it in a few minutes, or is it going to be another 3-hour debacle like it was this past winter? I hope it's not the latter.
Coming up this fall, on the ballots on Election Day, something that probably most of the people watching this program haven't given a lick of thought to or even know that it's going to be there. But there's going to be a question every 20 years. There's a question that's put on New York's ballots. It's required by the Constitution of the state, and it asks the people of the state of New York, do you want to have or do you want to authorize the having of a constitutional convention, a gathering of people from across the state to gather together to rethink the way government gets done in New York. Now, before I let you say anything, I just think back on what's happened the last 5, 10, 20 years in this state. The corruption charges, the Speaker of the Assembly, the Senate's Majority Leader, the charges against people in the governor's office, the most commonly used word to describe the New York legislature arguably has been dysfunction. This would be an opportunity, in some people's minds, to change that and maybe make it better. and have a better New York, a better government. But there are some people who are kind of scared about the idea too.
Right.
Tell us, Tom McKevitt, what your thoughts on this whole thing are.
Mike, what you talk about in theory is that what's going to happen is on November 7th, you'll go to the polls. And one thing people have to realize is you'll have the ballot, all people you're voting for in local offices. And it's not going to be there. You're voting for the Constitutional Convention. You have to take your ballot and flip it over. It's going to be in the reverse side. That's where it is. So the first thing is you have to realize where this is going to be.
You have to go looking for it.
You have to go looking for it. You have to find it at that point. And just like there's a myth going around that I've been hearing numerous times last week that if you don't vote no, you're automatically counted as a yes. I don't know where that started from, but that's not the case. The yeses will be the no's, and we'll see which side wins. If they vote yes, then there'll be a vote in 2018 for you to elect the delegates for the convention. And the problem is anyone is eligible to be a delegate for the convention. You, me, judges, anyone. And the last time we had a convention in 1967, many of the members of the delegates convention were members of the New York State Legislature. Right. So if you're going to allow the same people to do a convention like it was before, and you have a messed up system right now, what makes you think you're going to get a better system? If they were having a convention saying no elected officials were allowed, that's something which may be very attractive. But if you're going to allow the same people who got us to the point where we are today, what makes you think you can get better? And it could actually get far, far worse.
So what kinds of things would you be worried about that could happen if a lot of legislators were on the Constitutional Convention, were at the convention and in charge of things? Not much has happened by way of changing things and fixing things currently.
Right.
How bad do you think it might get?
Well, listen, we have changed it to one extent. I mean, on that same ballot, on the opposite side, will be the ability to take pensions away from corrupt lawmakers. So that's through the process already how it's gone. That's going to be right next to your question whether you want the convention or not. So if you're talking about getting rid of the corruption, that's one thing that we've already done in that instance. But, one thing could they do is could they eliminate the New York State Senate? And that could theoretically happen.
They can do anything, right?
They can do anything. You could eliminate a legislature. You could eliminate a governor. I mean, there are all sorts of things which it opens down to that point. But for example, many people think we should eliminate the Senate. And from my perspective is you still need a check and balance even with the legislative bodies. If you're to have one legislative body instead of two, again, you can have literally one part of the state, as it does in the Assembly, dominate everything and not being any check whatsoever. And through a convention, that could be. You could eliminate a whole branch of government at that point. Those are things which are on the table. Yeah.
So I guess crapshoot maybe is then what this would amount to, right? Because you have a lot of people saying, oh yeah, but we could get petitions going that this would have to be considered, and they've got this long list of things that could make New York's term limit, something like that.
Right, sure.
That could,
which I'm in favor of. Yes.
Yeah. So.
But again, if you're going to have the same legislature in that convention, do you think those term limits are still going to get passed? And can you have other things in there? For example, could you have, the governor at this point had done a free tuition program, which really isn't free, it doesn't really affect many people, but could you have another program which may theoretically cover a lot of people and cause our business environment to go through the roof as well? I mean, I think the one thing we have in New York State government is, yes, we have services, but we provide how we're going to pay for it. A convention could do things which would have no idea how we're going to pay for it until we're stuck at the bill at the end of the day.
Well, good to know, too, that there's going to be that other question about pension forfeiture on there. I think most everybody in New York State wants to see that sort of thing happen.
If that one doesn't get voted yes almost unanimously, then I don't understand this business anymore. But that one should overwhelmingly get passed. And I expect it will be.
And in the meantime, we're just about out of time, so I want to let you folks know how you can reach out to your representative. It's an easy thing for you to do. You can get a hold of Tom McKevitt at his office in East Meadow by dialing 228-4960. That's in the 516-228-4960, or send an email to McKevitt at nyassembly.gov. McKevitt at nyassembly.gov. He'd like to hear from you. Tom McKevitt, thanks for joining us today.
Always great to see you, Mike.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for you folks for joining us, and we'll hope to see you soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.